I think I just saw the Victoria Burton Harris enter this space. A new word is geet. Courage. Thanks, Ariel. Growth. Thanks to Lisa. Yeah, mystery, Aaron. Oh my God, I love you. Aaron, we have so many love notes from you on our cards board that actually the cards board is you. Mystery, I love that.
No, it's you, because they're all about you all. So you look in there and you see you and all the love that surrounds you every day.
Oh my God, honey, we feel that love, and thank you so much. We need it. We need it. We need more love. More love. So what's up? Folks are coming in. I think we'll give it about 30 more seconds and we'll get started with January Centering Justice. How we share power. Let's go. Great.
Good morning, everybody. So glad that we're getting settled. We're thinking about our words. Discipline, Mark. Oh, I was like, yes. Yes.
Discipline to get my spelling together. I'm like, is that right? Does that look right?
Yesterday I had hope was a disciple, Mark. That's what I
Right,
I mean,
right.
It could be. Good afternoon. Yes, it is 12:04. Good afternoon, y'all. My name is Hamida Bagarathy, pronoun she, her, hers, and I have the joy of working alongside Yodit and Carly to host, hold the container, laugh, reflect, think, sometimes cry with all of you at Centering Justice. Centering Justice has lived many lives. Started out way back when at the very top of COVID. And as we've grown as people, Centering Justice has grown. And really what we are most focused on and thinking about in this season of Centering Justice, so from December to March, is thinking about what are the ways that we are, how are we expressing, exploring, and also exiting old oppressive systems, and thinking about the ways in which we build new and transformative ways that don't harken back to old ways of oppressive systems, but are new ways in which we want to live and work and play and think about our world and interact with each other and build loving relationships and organizations and be in community with each other. So in thinking about that community and place and space and the relationships we build, you are joining me from my apartment here in Ypsilanti and on the unceded and occupied lands of the 3 council fires of Michigan, the Sauk, Fox, and the Wyandotte. And as I just named the land in which I'm like my apartment building is occupying, I'm occupying, I think about the ways in which leadership has been shared, how groups have moved, how our Native and Indigenous brothers and sisters and non-binary siblings and nibblings have moved in ways that really hope to distribute power and create communal leadership. And so in that spirit, as we are thinking about our big question, which is how must and will we transform to realize our visions of a just and thriving society, we're doing things different. We're thinking about how we're going to do things different, right? And really, how are we intentionally untethering ourselves from oppressive systems? And in last episodes and seasons, we spent some time really digging into how are we healing and affirming that our healing is essential, our individual, our collective, our organizational. And our hook is really thinking about, so we've explored healing. How are we thinking about sharing leadership and power? Oh my God, Jacqueline, revival, yes. So that word just spoke to me. Really, how are we nurturing power within and not over, and uplifting and listening to the voices of those most impacted by unjust systems, and creating real, effective, kind, loving, shared community leadership, governance models and practices. And so today, super excited to have Mark Greer with us today, because I mean, he's doing just that in his work. and with Transforming Power Fund. And so, Mark, I'm going to give you your full flowers by reading out your full bio. So we get all the, we get to see multiple facets of you. Mark is the co-executive director, external relations at the Transforming Power Fund, a Detroit-based social justice fund committed to transformative systems change. Mark's brief but impactful years as an organizer inspired him to pursue a career in philanthropy and corporate social responsibility, to challenge funders and companies to shift their strategies and operations, to reduce harm and increase resources to grassroots organizing and community control solutions. Mark is a native Detroiter, a musician, a frequent moviegoer, and Mark enjoys exploring parks with his wife, Jamisa, and their lovely, cute daughter, which we got to meet yesterday, Mia. So thankful, grateful that you're here with us today, Mark. And as many of you who have attended Centering Justice before know, we'd like to sort of invite our speaker collaborator to bring their whole self into the space. Mark is much more than the role that I just talked about, and that role is included in himself. So, in that spirit, Mark, can you tell us a little bit about the communities and identities that you are drawing upon as you enter into this conversation?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. I'm excited to be here. Nice to meet you all. My name is Mark Greer, he, him, his. Yes, co-executive director of the Transforming Power Fund. Father, husband, father, right? Son, identifies as a straight Black male, 6 foot, brown skin, black hair, gray, start graying beard, and just native Detroiter is like one of my biggest identities. Grew up in a working class household. My father was in the military and was on a police force. So I grew up in a very, discipline is my word, because I grew up in that household. I kind of strayed away from it as much as I could, but it's reeling me back in. Grew up in the city, went to Detroit public schools, kindergarten through 8th grade. As my grandparents would say, started hanging around the wrong type of people, right? In middle school, ended up going to getting sent to an all-boys Catholic school about 30 minutes away. And I think the reason why I started realizing what working class meant, that was my exposure to wealth, right? It was first time dealing with white kids, first time dealing with wealthy Black kids. And it just kind of woke me up to the social inequities and educational disparities that really set up my career, the career that I'm in now. And so, of course, my Blackness is centered, but I also more and more, really starting to think about class. 3 on 3 in the house on East Side, Warren and Cashew, 7 Mile and Hoover. That's just a little bit about me.
Look, I'm all in the chat, like 313.
Right.
And I share that experience of being moved into a different community. I've talked about this on CJ, being moved into a different community after growing up in Detroit. Always grateful to have spent those formative years in Detroit, and like you, just learned so much that I didn't know about the world when I got out of Detroit, right? Some good, some not so good. Mark, another question that we have began to ask is, what is your story of transformation? And the context is that, we really are trying to create spaces where, as Hamida said, we can not just theorize about transformation, but practice into it, and recognizing that healing that she talked about is a journey, right? And it is about the unlearning of these internalized systems and internalized messages and notions that many of us, most of us, were sort of bathed in. So what is that story of transformation? And in light of your work, maybe even as you think about leadership too.
Absolutely. And it's I'm still on that journey, honestly. After that high school experience, I went to University of Michigan for undergrad and studied political science, Afro-American studies, thinking I was, woke and, go into community organizing and doing the work and, realizing university is a great program, but there was a lot of undoing that I had to do from an organized perspective, just, colonized ways of thinking, bringing my academic experience over my lived experience. I having to realize those are my lived experience is just as valid as the academic, and more so, particularly when dealing with community. and not bringing that kind of know-it-all culture that we tend to have in like academia. Was an organizer. They put me on the west side of the city, just kind of like get in unfamiliar territory for me. But even with that, I still brought this kind of like work hard culture to it, and ended up burning out. With organizing, and I had a mentor. I was going to go back to school, and still again that framework around I need like some more credentials, right? But a mentor said, get an MBA, understand the social, political, and now add the economic to it. And that, that program went to Wayne State. With that program allowed me to do an internship with JP Morgan Chase Foundation. And that was my interest into philanthropy and doing kind of like my mentor said, bringing my full self, the lived experience and now the academic experience, at least to get into the door. The person that was over the portfolio at Chase for the Detroit program really understood like was from the city, understood what it means to be a Black man in this space. There's not that many of us, and to be able to do the work, and so just kind of fell in love with this idea of like redistributing wealth from these wealthy institutions, banks, foundations. I went to several other foundations. I've kind of bounced between corporate and private philanthropy for the past 8 or 9 years, and that I think that to answer your question, the piece around the transformation over that time, I've learned, okay, this is a harmful system, right? I can participate in it. I need to know what I'm dealing with. But there's got to be a way to decolonize this space, where there's got to be a way to shift decision-making power from, this kind of ivory tower way of thinking and, very heavy academic piece to be more rooted in community needs, not just like, what's the theory of change? And then we change it again, and we keep changing it, and we keep changing it. And so that's what led me to TPF, honestly, to really think about this participatory model, this way of leading from the back, right? Of being able to facilitate, lift up community voice, allow communities to fall into their natural leadership and to recognize themselves as leaders, not just recipients of philanthropy. And that's where I'm at in my journey. I mean, I'm still figuring out. Your questions are actually bringing up things for me, so I appreciate it.
No, I appreciate that too. I mean, it resonates like I think I spent the majority of my career sort of trying to reform systems, like make this better or, soften this or change this process or make the application a little bit more,
Right.
And what I'm so curious and delighted as I'm on my own journey of sort of untethering from that and trying on, what does it mean to do something completely different or to return home to ways pre-colonial ways that we did things. To rediscover that, to normalize that those ways of being in relationship with each other actually can be effective too. I think I'm a baby abolitionist, but I'm like a recovering reformist.
Right. Yeah. That's the journey.
Right. That's the journey. Yeah. That is the journey. Yeah. So we have been, when we're part of that unlearning is asking ourselves, where is power, locating and mapping power in ourselves and our communities and our organizations, right? And providing access points for for us to either seed or share power. And as Hamida mentioned, we are really interested in talking to people that are practicing shared and distributed leadership, practicing models of transparency, practicing, a transfer of power. And so I'm kind of curious about how at TPF, how are you all sharing power, resources, decision-making with the people you work alongside? And maybe as a follow-up, like what principles, because we believe highly in like guiding principles and values at New. So what are the kind of guiding principles that steer you towards that approach?
Yeah, absolutely. And so just a little bit about TPF. And so we formerly came together in 2019, but the work came out of there was a research report with Detroit People's Platform and Allied Media called the 12 Recommendations for Detroit Funders. And it included things that we kind of consider as, common sense now: give multi-year general operating support grants, make sure that you're at least engaging community, when you're coming up with strategies and making decisions. We take it a step further and say that community needs to be at the table and leading. But that report came out in 2015. You'll hear me talk about the design team, which operates as our board. Phenomenal women of color that started this organization. But they realized that none of the foundations were really taking on to this report. It was kind of, we can do it, but that's far-fetched. And so they just said, we'll do it ourselves, right? We'll start this organization and we'll be able to model what does it look like to do participatory grant making in a Detroit context. And with, going to the values, transparency, shifting power, justice, taking the equity and raising it up to justice and liberation. I think those are the principles that really root us as an organization. So you have the design team, which members from the community that started this organization. But then you have staff, of course. We work as a co-directorship. So I'm co-executive director of external relations. I get to talk to lovely people, right? Do some of the fundraising, evangelize about TPF. And my co-executive director, Bishop Marcia Dinkins, handles the internal operations and the giving. And within that giving aspect is our participatory grant making body, which is we call the community table. These are 7 to 9 organizers, activists, artists, mothers, fathers, brothers, sisters, people from the community who care about the issues, who experience some of the harms, the injustices that we're trying to solve. And again, people who are just rooted in community. They apply. We just rolled off our first cohort. They go through 1 year commitments up to 3 years. So that first cohort just rolled off. We're starting a new cohort. We actually had their first training today. And we talked to them about, what does traditional philanthropy look like? These are the harms. This is why TPF formulated. This is how we seek to do things. And then give them tonight, like we're going to turn the tables. Okay, what do you want to see? How do you want the organization to operate? What are our grant making priorities for the year? Let's talk to your neighbors, talk to people in your community to identify 3 to 4 issue areas. And they really have the primary decision on our grant making. So we'll do an RFP 3 or 4 times a year where we request proposals from the community in 501c3s and non-501c3s. And the community table reviews, just like a program officer, just like anybody within a foundation context, but they have something that I believe that traditional philanthropy does, which is again centering that lived experience and tap into the community. Again, I'm from the city, but as much as I would love to be more connected, I'm not as connected, right? And so humbling myself, realizing that that's the way that we're looking to shift power. And then we take that model and we go to other foundations in the state around the country and say, this is a way that grant making can look. And these are the equitable outcomes and just outcomes that come out of the decisions that our community members have made. And so that's a practice. There's things that work really well. There's things that we're going to try to revamp this year, but it's a constant, evolving. And I think one of the principles that continue to raise in my head is trust. And you're hearing a lot more about trust-based philanthropy. But I think that trust piece where it's like trusting the community to know what they need and to be able to activate, on what they need, I think is central.
Thank you so much for offering that, Mark. I mean, so I'm trying to hold the breadth and depth of what you just shared. And one notion that stuck out to me is participatory grant making. Can you talk a little bit about what it is and how it works to distribute leadership, power, resources, and uplift the voice of the folks who are really in it?
Yeah. I mean, it comes out of, so participatory decision making and grant making actually isn't things new. People of color, Black folks have been doing it for centuries, right? And I think this conversation around, rediscovering, returning to practices. That's something, again, I knew, but in the back of my mind, I didn't really make the connection between now. But participatory decision making is really about taking away this kind of hierarchical ways of thinking. You think of like, CEOs and executives and leadership being like a solo one person type of thing, or maybe a board of directors who are all credentialed X, Y, and Z, right? And then if you're on the bottom of the totem pole, you just have to deal with whatever decisions are made, right? You can vote, right? But a lot of people have come discouraged with the way that our democratic system has turned out. Participatory grant making actually seeks to return to what are those democratic principles around like really engaging people at the grassroots level on decision making. So we channel it in a grant making terms of, one, you all get to determine what are the priorities, but we're trusting you all to be in tune with your community, your neighbors, and the issues that you care about. You get to determine the priorities, and you get to review the grant application. Help us do recruiting to source the grant applications, and you review the grant applications. The way that we do that, we use a ranked choice voting system. So say we have 20 applicants for RFP, and we might have 10. We have money enough for 10 grantees. We ask the community table to go back and review, a list of like 10 questions that we've asked. They, score it, 1 from 5, and we source the top, 15, top 12 to 15 applicants that come out of that. And then we have a discussion. And so there are nuanced discussions. And, well, why did you rate this low? What makes you think that this organization can do X, Y, and Z? And they have a discussion, and they go back and then they vote again based off of the trust and relationships that they've built. And it honestly takes longer than the traditional process. But what we've seen since 2019, we've granted $1.7 million to about 50 organizations that around like 40 of them out of 50 have never received grant funding from more of the larger institutions. They get individual donations, and so they're very grassroots, very scrappy. But they don't really see that money. But our community members source them, right? And so now our idea is, with this participatory grant making, we're sourcing organizations that some of the larger funders can now skip. We'd love for everyone to fund TPF, but you actually can skip us and go directly to grassroots organizations and fund them. And I think that's the power of that participatory grant making, and that we would love to kind of broaden out to more decision making, and even like the ways that what is the future of the organization, and making sure the community is at the center of steering that, and who we receive funding from and who we should kind of steer away from based off of community principles. Like that's kind of the future that we're laying out.
Mark, I'm still like trying to hold all the different moving pieces you talked about. And I hear you about community. I feel like it's probably a practice, right? It's praxis. In the spirit of sort of like community, really thinking about our community ideals too. I would be remiss if I didn't share that for some people in Native and Indigenous communities, like the term totem pole can be something that's harmful.
Excuse me.
So
Yes.
I just share that, because sometimes we don't know of the origins of the things we speak. I was using an aphorism the other day, and I Googled it for some random reason. I was like, wow, I never, ever want to say that again.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for something.
For sure, we're all learning, right? There may be folks in the audience who wasn't aware of that, but wanted to name that. And then I think about, Mark, you talked about so many different things in terms of like how there's voting, there's ranking, and it makes me curious. I think Yodit probably had some question about like a design, or like sort of like the ways in which that was shaped.
Yeah, this is fantastic. I think I want to take us back to, you made reference to 3 women who were instrumental in the start of TPF, and I would love to just bring their names into space, because they're personally have inspired my life, but have a great deal to do with a lot of what we've seen happen in community. So let's give those flowers to those 3 sisters.
Yes, absolutely.
Linda Campbell from the Detroit People's Platform. Linda is a longtime organizer. If you've ever read Race to Lead, Linda was a part of the Building Movement Project that's now become a national kind of think tank on leadership and race in the social sector. Lisa Leverett, longtime organizer, and Reverend Ross, who, as I recall, has been in the North End of Detroit for a really long time. I had a chance to work with Reverend when I was doing work at Vanguard. And these are three intergenerational legends in the work. That 12 recommendation document that Allied Media, like Lisa had such, so some of like, I want people to understand that these three Black women, you know, the community benefits agreement, even though it didn't pass in Detroit, that was largely led by Linda Campbell, a Black woman advocating on behalf of all Detroiters. Lisa's work with the 12 recommendations, even though you didn't see widespread adoption by the philanthropic sector, that report and the authors of that report, their work is still reverberating. We're here where we are now because of their courage to speak truth to power then. And they, of course, were inspired by the folks who wrote The Revolution Will Not Be Funded. Got to shout them out too for insight focus. And then Reverend Ross and the work around community-driven planning and community participation. I mean, just such like, so what I heard as you were talking, the kind of the question I was holding around design. So first you're bringing this like, what I would call like deep wisdom and worldview, right? From those three.
Absolutely, absolutely.
And rather than calling them a board, which sometimes can inherently create a power dynamic, they are, will you remind me again, you call that the design team, right? Okay.
Right.
I love that. And then you have the community table, which is the seat of where participatory grant making is happening, right? And those two groups, Mark, we just learned about sociocracy last month, and New is kind of embracing some of the philosophies of sociocracy. And it really talks about this kind of dynamic two-way exchange of information and governing that I'm seeing kind of alive in TPS, even if you haven't done it on purpose. And then the leadership framework, the co-directors. So when the structure is kind of set up that way, and I'm visualizing it as like circles, almost, maybe because of the sociocracy influence. But it seems to me that there's kind of like people are operating in their gifts. And we'll talk a little bit about the role of the design team, because I think not only do they have deep knowledge and wisdom, but they have influence.
Yes.
And that's super important, right? And I think, so we'll talk about that in a second. And then the co-executive directors, it sounds like you're sharing leadership, but operating in your respective gifts, right?
Right.
And then the community table is really who is feeding design and leadership to inform your praxis and decision making. Am I getting that right, Mark?
Yes, that's perfect. Yeah. That's better than I can put it.
When we think about, I think that why that clarity is important to me is because we talk about leadership being lonely, and I find what you're describing is a possible antidote to that. And the reason why it's lonely is often because it props up this kind of charismatic individual leader, right?
Right.
And while the charisma is important, it's important for me to evangelize New's work as its CEO. It's important for me to be an influencer in the field. It's important for me to earn credibility and trust. The downside of that, Mark, is that I just heard it last night at our board meeting. Somebody said, I believe a lot of people know Yodit and Yodit's connection to New. I'm not sure they know everything that New does. So what I have seen is that then when a leader like Yodit or Mark or Hamida leaves an organization, so goes all of that influence, charisma, trust, et cetera, and new leader kind of has to start over. In fact, when I got this job, one of the local foundations said, well, we don't fund organizations during a transition. That's the time when I need the money. What are you talking about? So the move towards a shared or distributed leadership model, potentially, at least the value
Mhm.
proposition of it for me, is that it could keep some stabilization in that organization and provide opportunity for folks to spin in and out without it, relying on that single person. And what I saw with you that I'm not, I mean, there are people who are influencers on our board for sure, and many more of them that are very passionate. But I think I'm not sure they're not necessarily influencers in our industry, if that makes sense. The way
Yeah,
Linda, Lisa,
right,
and Reverend Ross are, right? Those are
right,
names
right,
we know in industry. And so even
right.
having them tied to the organization, if you or your other left, I'm not worried that TPF is going to fall apart because the three of them are
Exactly.
there. That's fascinating. Fascinating.
Absolutely. And yeah, and we've had that turnover because this work is hard. But those three
Right.
particularly have been consistent. And so you're right. Like, and I think even with they're also thinking about that kind of like leadership transition with them. They've been doing the work for some time, and they or built this organization up and thinking about how can they also pass their influence on to that next generation of leaders that will also have that trust and consistency with them. So
It's like I mean, I don't mean this in an ageist way, but it's like having grandma or
no,
grandpa in the house, right?
right,
I
right.
remember when the former CEO of PolicyLink transitioned, she announced her retirement in Chicago. This was right before the pandemic. You remember at the
Yeah,
Race Forward conference or what have you, and her successor, who she had groomed, right, to be in the
right,
role, but she
right.
was going to stay on as an executive in residence for a period of time to cushion the transition. And I love that.
Absolutely.
And I immediately got the visualization of my grandmother who still lives in the house with our family. And
Awesome.
what that meant to us to have her there to be that thread of memory and remembrance and
Absolutely.
history and wisdom, etc.
Yeah.
It's so culturally appropriate. Like it just
Exactly.
makes, right?
Exactly.
It makes perfect sense.
And when they brought me on, it was very intentional about this kind of multi-generational
Right,
conversation. And I identify as a millennium. And we have Gen Z staff, right, that we're still
right.
learning how to manage and different things. And there's this kind of knowledge gap, and our whole team got the chance to kind of learn and listen to
At
our
the
design
feet of
team, like
those
what's
three. Mm,
exactly.
mm.
What is the history? What is, what are they seeing? What are they seeing today? And, they also, but I think the important thing with that kind of multi-generational, you said it's kind of two-way street. They listen
Right.
to us as well, right? They listen to our perspectives and the things that we're hearing. And, we come together, and I believe we're a stronger organization because we have that intentional, multi-generational,
Bridging. Yeah.
approach. Yeah.
Instead of, I think that, when we talk about exiting extractive and oppressive systems, like similar to them, I benefit deeply from
Mhm.
our staff who happen to be younger, but also
Mhm.
have all these other sets of experiences that they can bring, right? But when they can't
Yeah.
access the ranks because we're making them prove themselves through various levels of the organization, or to have a certain title, or to have a certain, pedigree, it can really get us in these echo chambers, right? I've been in
Yes.
organizations, and frankly, I've participated in that echo chamber. It feels so good to be invited to the leadership team.
Right.
You like,
Right.
I
Right.
made it, right? You ain't
Yeah.
thinking
Exactly.
about bringing nobody else in there. It's like,
Right. Right.
I'm there. And now I can't even imagine. I mean, the way we organize our work, I want to be thinking about a leader-full organization.
Mhm.
And so I will just say that at New, we do have a group of leaders, obviously, but we've
Right.
made those meetings open. Anybody can come. There's
That's
no,
great.
so
That's
if you
awesome.
want to come observe and know, you're welcome, to be there. The notes are transparent, what we're talking about. We've just been really honest. Like if it's
That's
something
great.
private, we'll tell you. You gotta leave, right? But
Right.
otherwise,
Right.
people, that's that is fascinating, and yet so, to me at least, the way that y'all are set up is kind of so intuitive as well. Mm, juicy. Juicy, juicy, juicy.
Oh, thank you.
Well,
So, yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
I was gonna go off our plan, so I was gonna. That sounds good to me. You know, I mean, I think about so like in moving in a new way. Sometimes that can present new opportunities, but also like some new challenges that like might not have been anticipated. So, I mean, within new, our lovely Carly led us in a dialogue this morning, thinking about like conflict and the ways in which we think about and talk about like tricky situations that come up. And I'll drop the I statements here in that I move very differently at new and in the ways that I've moved at past places. And there have been a plethora of new joys and wondrous things and a plethora of ruh-roh moments for me that I sort of had to learn my way through lovingly with Yodit and other folks who are my colleagues. And so it makes me wonder, Mark, like kind of in having, as Yodit talked about, sort of like an intuitive way of leading, you know, what are maybe perhaps what are some of the ways that conflict might surface, or what are some of the antidotes or kind of ways that you heal conflict, given that it's a new system? I mean, it can't really open a manual and be like solutions on page 33, right? It's like you're creating.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's funny, we kind of had a conversation today. One of the tensions within TPF is, you know, we have to raise the money to re-grant it. Right. And so that leads to conversation. Okay, who should we take money from? Right. I'm coming. My role before this was in a corporate responsibility type role. Right. And so I've, you know, and I said this verbatim, like none of these companies like had, you know, don't have blood on their hands, right? And so, and like that's just the honest truth, like just with the way that capitalism is set up and these extractive systems, it's hard. Even the most well-meaning, you know, organization that have cleaned up their act in the past couple of years still have done generational harm, right? Particularly, I'm thinking about, I had a conversation about banks, right? You know, I personally might have a closer relationship with a well-meaning, like justice-focused, like person in a bank, but that doesn't dissolve the harm that that bank has done, particularly in Detroit, right? And so the tension, particularly with, you know, I think the design team and myself is okay. Like how do we, one, redistribute wealth, you know, from these type of organizations that have the wealth but have a problematic thing without legitimizing that company, right? And still getting the resources that our communities need, right? And so that's an ongoing conversation, but it's I've been in this role for 9 months now. And so this 9 months has really been building that trust over time. And it's not like something that happens overnight. You know, I love to think that they love me. My design teams loves me, and they are also protective of the organization. And so it's building that trust, you know, being, you know, a person that is listening to what is being said, and respecting the different ways that we can go about things. And so for now, you know, we don't take money from certain industries. And I think that we'll continue that. And there's opportunities for other type of companies that, you know, need to be aligned with our principles, that need to at least see where we're going and not try to micromanage us when we say we're seeing this decision making to our community. And so it's a lot of communication, it's a lot of, you know, trust building. And I think that transparency and just having the real conversation, saying the thing and not, you know, kind of trying to like code it in niceness. I think that's kind of been the problem within movement. Like, oh, let's just kind of like not say it and, you know, be, you know, kind of, you know, quiet about it. Like, no, let's get everything out there. Let's have, you know, real conversations with love, right? And knowing that we're trying to get on the same page, you know, on what's best for the community. Did I answer the question?
Yeah, you really, like, the hair stood up on the back of my neck. This Kamita and I have talked about it. I've talked about it with our board. I've talked about it with our team. We're leading a large scale of first in 30 years transformation of the building that we own and steward in Ann Arbor.
Yeah.
And, you know, that brings us squarely into philanthropy and really into conversations, much like what you uplifted about, like, whose money you gonna take, you know? And in at least one instance, you know, it was like, we can't in good conscience, even though that they could write the check for the project. They could write the $10 million and I would never have to
Right,
ask
be
anybody
good,
for
right.
anything else. Um, but it is kind of like blood money. And yet multiple conversations that I've had, Mark, with people, you know, as I've been dealing with that in cognitive dissonance and internal disconnect that I'm having, is like, get the money and do something good with it, right?
Exactly.
But I just,
It's hard. Like, yeah.
It's been a challenge.
Mhm.
You know, we started, I guess it's been over the last few years, I've been in some national learning communities and starting to hear about a just transition framework. And really dreamed of, oh my God, what would that look like in practice here? And I want to, if I can, I want to briefly, mostly for the group, kind of just show a graphic and a brief definition. And then I want to talk to you about kind of, again, bringing from theory to practice, because we end up bumping up on some of the very systems, you know, that we are trying to untether ourselves. So let me just show this briefly and provide one more time a definition on just transition. So if you're hearing that phrase, it's a vision-led, unifying and place-based set of principles, processes, and practices that build economic and political power to shift from an extractive economy to a regenerative economy. And the idea is that after centuries of global plunder, the profit-driven, growth-dependent industrial economy that's rooted in the myth of white supremacy, heteropatriarchy, consumerism, and ableism is severely undermining the life support systems of the planet, and I think arguably the planet in general. And thus this work really came out of the environmental justice and labor movements. An economy that's based on extracting from a finite system faster than the capacity we have to regenerate will end, either through collapse or through our intentional reorganization. And the folks at Movement Generation offer that transition is inevitable, but justice isn't. So within this visual are on my left, maybe your right, these kind of extractive, the tenets of the extractive economies that we're in. So there's this colonial mindset and kind of consumerism driving our worldviews. There's extraction happening, digging, burning, dumping. There is a militarized and imperialist governance structure in place, the enclosure of wealth and power, and then in that exploitive work of America's labor force and workers at every level. So what we want to do is stop the bad and build the new. We want to divest from this power and starve and stop through by driving racial justice and social equity, by shifting economic control to communities, by democratizing wealth in the workplace, advancing ecological restoration, relocalizing most production and consumption, retaining and restoring cultures and traditions. And so part of what we have to do in this process of divesting is also changing the rules, bringing that capital into community to the point of fundraising, but changing the rules, as you are doing, Mark, about how it gets used, how it gets dispersed, who gets access to it. And in what we're looking towards is a living economy where there's care and sacredness rooted in our worldviews, right? Care for each other, care for the planet, care for ourselves. That's the reason we started by talking about healing, because you can't do nothing out here if you're not putting your, as the proverbial, oxygen mask on first. And we have all been in this sick water. We've been, and so that healing is essential. Our purpose has to be ecological and social well-being. And we can, which is the reason why we uplifted the sociocracy as one way of thinking about governance and deep democracy. Our resources have to be regenerative, and we have to be working cooperatively. As soon as I saw this, I just jumped right on it, and I cautioned against, I'm gonna stop sharing now. I honestly kind of held it close to my vest, Mark, because I was like, I don't want people to co-opt this like they have every other thing. But I keep at it's become kind of an urgency to begin to talk about it as we work together for collective liberation, because when in the fall, and this is now a pattern at CJ, I'll show up in September and be like, we ought to shut it all down, and I'm like, and then I'm like, well, we can't shut it down because the people need to get paid,
Right,
and then
right.
you're back on the wheel, right? So I'm curious about like, how are you all grappling with these big systems? And these are questions people
Mhm.
ask all the time. Like, what happens if we get rid of police? How are we going to stay
Right,
safe? And I'm like,
right,
well, how'd you stay safe before it was police, right? Well,
right,
no,
right,
it's the
right.
case. And are
Exactly.
you really safe with the
Are we
police?
safe right
I
now?
don't know.
Yeah.
Are you safe right now? Right. But I think it can be, and some of our comrades kind of put these bold ideas and visions out with no real way to get there. How are
Right,
you
right.
getting there, Mark? How are
Yeah.
you getting there to this just transition?
Yeah, and I like to uplift that piece where it said transition is inevitable, justice is not, right? And so
That's
like
right.
the systems are going to move, and like we talk about transforming power, like power being the ability to act, and like you have organized people and organized money, like that's what power is. And so like when I was organized, oh, we have the people, we don't have the money, right? When I'm in these companies, we have the money, we don't really have the hearts of the people, right? And so now it's thinking about like I think people power is something that's strong, and so
Mm,
the way that we're looking at it from transform power, like let's bring that organized money in so that we can innovate, right? If you're looking at venture capital and like this kind of crypto culture, like those industries are allowed to innovate and try stuff and fail and get arrested and come back and raise more money and do all these things. Like communities don't get that
don't
benefit
have
of
me
the doubt,
hollering
right?
on
And so
this
like
Zoom.
that's something that I think about a lot, is like how can we be the risk capital so that we can try stuff, right? And so when you think about public safety, right? And like I said, my father was a police officer. Like he retired. I grew up around police. Like I get it. And baby abolitionists, right? Like there is no. And I talk to him about this all the times. Like, all right, like how many times have you like felt like you prevented a crime, right? Versus showing up after somebody's already harmed, right? And the damage that does to him psychologically over time, right? The harm that, they're not centering police, but like it's extracted for everyone involved and they don't get paid well, right? And so like what is these new system, what kind of new system? We have a grantee on Detroit Public Safety team where they're trained in de-escalation, right? They're trained, they're from the community, they know who the players are, they know who are committing crimes, quote unquote. And they, if somebody gets shot over some drugs or some gang stuff, what usually happens is retaliation, and it's a retaliation back and forth. What they're trained to do is to go to, the person, the group of people that know the person who did it and say, hey, look, please don't retaliate. Y'all know this only ends in more violence. And over time, what we've seen is that the people that are affiliated with the crime, get it, right? And the crime starts going down. And this is something that has been tried on a local level across the country, hasn't been scaled. How do we continue to fund those type of models, raise it up to larger foundations that can resource these type of things and help these models scale to where it becomes policy, right? And so it's like taking the local, funding the things that work, some things that won't work, we can try and reiterate and grow. Because ultimately, philanthropic capital is only a small part of the system. I think we talk about in that graphic, like the role of government. It needs to be localized, and there are federal dollars at stake that can be invested in these things in new models. But again, we don't know until we invest in them. And I, like I said, I hope that TPF serves as kind of that risk capital up front to be able to grow those models.
So, Mark, you make me
Can I
think.
say one thing? What if we
Please.
called it trust capital? because
Right.
that's what,
Right.
if it's just
That's what it
trust
is.
capital, right?
Yeah.
I trust I'll
Yeah.
give you this
I love
money,
that.
you're gonna handle your business, right? Okay, sorry.
Right. I like that. I'm writing it
No,
down.
you're okay. I mean, so, you know, Mark, I remember when we had connected, there was this piece around, I like to think about sort of like 360, sort of like how we can all act towards what we want. And one thing I observed in some of my past behaviors is really when I think about funders trying to work at the margins, it's like, I really actually don't need to do that. I know that I can do this with $5. So actually, even if you give me 4, that's gonna be fine, because it's all fine, because thank you very much. And
Right.
I think about the ways in which like R&D or sort of like exploration or trying things out, which I feel so grateful to be able to do at New. Like for instance, in this current year, I'm trying out 3 different tiered sliding scale models for the ways in which folks are able to access resources with us. And I mean, I constantly think about I don't really know how this is done. I can't benchmark towards like this other org did exactly this and this is what I should expect, because there's a level of unknown or expected. But sort of like being able to hold space and say this is part of the process towards where we are going to learn greater learning as to how to engage in what feels right, to ask from our community for this collective learning and understanding we're reaching. And so, I think about the ways in which when I asked for $5 and was happy with 4, how I myself was like not acknowledging the full breadth of, so I'm not going to talk about only the tight margins. I'm not going to say, I'm sure DT will let us keep the lights on. I'm not going to include that in my needs. Like, what are some thoughts that come to mind when you think about how can we also think about expansive funding? And in that shift of my own paradigm, another thing I hold and I'm still growing into, I probably talk more about it than practice it because it's a little shaky for me, but knowing that like our news mission is really important to me, and for our funders and for some of the folks that I interact with, like their mission, like we are integral parts of that. So while I'm like trying to lay out this case, I mean, which might be part me, might be part their expectation. I mean, in some ways, and this goes back to your earlier point, like there is also a need to fund us, to work with us, to also help achieve their mission. It's more mutually beneficial than at times it's presented. So basically, the short is, what are some tips for like asking for more, asking for what you need, because and acknowledging that it's a two-way street. It's not like, oh my God, thank you so much for being this magnanimous benefactor.
Yeah. I think that working in the social impact space, like I've grown up feeling like, oh, you have to take a vow of poverty, right, to work in nonprofits, right? And you shouldn't expect to make more. If you want to do that, you can go to corporate. I just found out about private philanthropy. It's pretty cushy, right? Like in my career, right? And so I was there for a minute, but it didn't necessarily match with the values, right? And so okay, I'll go back to nonprofit, and people take pay cuts, right, to go back to do purpose work, and that's not helpful, right, to keeping people and to avoiding burnout. I think as organizations, people who work and run nonprofits and social impact organizations, like think about the full cost of what we're doing, right? How much does it cost to really pay people? And I mean pay people to retain them, so you don't have to keep recruiting and hiring and training. It costs 5 times more to replace an employee than it does to maintain one, right? So pay people what they're worth. You get the skill set, and you're able to grow an organization. Account for that when you're going to fund. Account for the overhead, right? All of these percentages, and that's something that we agitate funders about all the time. It is like you're asking an organization to not have more than 20% overhead. You want everything to go to programming. You want everything to go to programming, but like who's running the programs, right? And there's a quote, and I have to find. I heard it from Tanisha McHarris, but I think she found it from somebody. The phrase is "fund us like you want us to win," right? Fund us like you want us to win, and that means just like I was talking about, kind of on the venture capital side, like you're able to throw all this money. I love trust capital. You need to like copyright that, and I'm gonna give you credit every time I say it. But you need to fund organizations like you want to actually solve the problem that you're solving for. And like you mentioned, Hamida, like foundations and these funders, they need the nonprofit sector to do what they're doing. If you have a mission, if you just care, even if you just care about, the IRS requires foundations to give out 5% of their endowment every year. You need foundations for that. You need that to give to certified 501c3s. Why not maximize the impact for that? And if you want to maximize the impact, you need to fund the organizations to the full cost of what it costs to have the impact, if that makes sense. I feel like I talked in circles, but I think that that's really the key. And so it does go down to, it's our responsibility to go and say, hey, look, it costs X amount of dollars to really true this thing. You can give me less than that, but you're not going to have the impact that you are seeking. And just being honest about that. And if they pass you over, we have to get out of the scarcity mindset that there are only so much money that we can get. There's trillions of dollars out there. And as many nonprofits as it feel like we're competing with, like, we don't have to feel like, we don't have to fall into that trap of like feeling like we're competing. Run your race, build out the true cost of it. And I'm hopeful right now the way that we're operating, that's working out for us.
Ooh, that opened up a lot for me, Hamida. And y'all, you sort of uplifted a lot, like what, do one, to your former comment, Mark, is shifting this mindset from power over to power with, and this idea that the power is in the people, right? Mm-hmm. And part of the way systems of supremacy, violence, extraction work is to make us believe it's not, that the power is not within us. So I think it's really important for us to cultivate our individual and collective power. And that can look like all of the things that we've talked about today and more. So I think it's important for us the reason why we do the work of healing from the internalized violence, internalized hierarchy, internalized punishment, the reason we do that work is because, and the reason I do it, let me use an I statement, is because I'm aware that it has taken me time to build up the courage to say to a funder, fund me like you want me to win. But also I got receipts, Mark, that allowed me to be able to say, here's why we're winning. Yeah. And so right. There's some, and so when you talk about, so there's that. And then the second piece I want to talk about is you all sort of began to talk about like retention strategies and the like. And, we've been talking about quiet quitting and the, great migration. And I think our tendency is to go to money, right? Suddenly people know they can make more money and they're going to leave their job. And I'll tell you, one of the hardest things for me at New has been holding the balance of our mission and our margin. And my largest budget line item is payroll, is salaries and benefits, and any ED in here will likely tell you the same. And at the end of the day, although I believe that the people who work for New are the most important pieces of New, that's not who I work for as a public charity. I work for the public. And so I have had this challenge of one, how first, like writ large, we have to get people at equitable compensation. Exactly. That being said, you cannot put me up against a for-profit entity and say, I could make this money at XYZ. So some of us are going to have to decide whether this is the place they want to be, not because we're the sector of scarcity and the sector of disparity, because that's true too, but because some of us are out here trying to hold fidelity to what the public sector is meant to do, and that's serve the public. And I will say we've been able to retain and attract some of the, as far as I'm concerned, some of the best talent. And I was able to do that when we didn't have two nickels to rub together.
Yeah.
So it's not, I want us to be mindful about internalizing these capitalistic beliefs of the American dream. If I have more money, I'm going to, now does money make me happy? Yes, it does. But it's not the only thing that makes us happy.
Right.
And I think that our next big kind of piece to grapple with is going to be, especially for younger professionals who have high levels of academic attainment and achievement, who have great expectations and demands of those of us who are older and who have maybe settled for less than desirable circumstances. But we need to be having an intergenerational conversation about what is enough and what is enough in the context of the just transition.
Absolutely.
Right. And I find myself falling into appeasement as a leader, because you don't want to lose this great talent. But really, at the end of the day, to your point, and I don't mind going over the 20% overhead. Who gonna check me? Ain't nobody. What they gonna do? What they gonna do for real? I don't mind going to that number. I'm at 19% right now. I'm gonna push it over next year. I don't care. But I do care about when my annual report comes out and XYZ organization that's trying to make sure people are safe on the east side of the county doesn't say, well, that's nice. The money that New raised, they made to take care of themselves, right? And not to help us to deliver. And then the final, I guess that was what I wanted to say. I think these are the thorny kind of wicked problems, as Jim Collins would say, that we have to come up against. And I think it's really important for us to continue dialoguing about it, and the shared leadership to kind of bring this back when we share that across the team. And I think today for me is about kind of practicing that script, Mark, for how to talk with our teams and each other. About how we do it.
And I love this dialogue, because even if, like, I feel like we're saying similar things, but like different like perspectives, and like I'm learning and growing in ways that I'm also being able to come back and communicate to my team. And I think that's strong. That's the way that we're stretching. And then that tension, holding that tension, is important for growth.
Yeah. Oh, I think the other thing I want to talk about briefly, Hamida, sorry to snatch and grab the mic.
Go for it. You got my support.
Thank you, sis. Is foundations and program officers. So what I have seen, particularly since 2020, is the representation of program officers change. And I have seen that representation positively impact nonprofit organizations. And I will say for myself, New benefited from that. That being said, when we're talking about power is on those boards.
Absolutely.
What you got to say about that?
That's next. I think that's the next like phase is like, how do we diversify boards? I think you mentioned, like even like within your board, with our board, like they're from the community, they are rooted in it. Foundation boards tend to be, oh, you were executive of this, right? Or you have accounting experience, so we need that. We need, for some reason they have fundraisers, like you don't have to raise money in a lot of these traditional foundations. Like, where is that community representation? I've seen even some of the best organizations right now have a separate community board. Like, no. Put the community people on the real board, right? Put them in the real board, be in the same room with it. You still have the executive and blah, 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 but you have to diversify, and like they have to have a real voice. I saw some research, like you can have a token person there, but you really need at least 3 people of like identity to like actually make that influence and have that voice like that. I think that's next.
Let's clarify that. We're talking about when you're constructing and doing your board recruitment, it's not enough to have the single person representing an identity, you need whatever that identity is, multiple people that hold that identity to create a
Exactly.
culture where they feel safe. Yeah, that's good.
Exactly. Right. You know, feel safe and feel like they can speak up, because
Right.
you mentioned it, deep, like I can easily get comfortable being in an executive room and rubbing elbows, eating good
Right,
food,
right.
right? And I get so comfortable that I'm speaking for myself, can forget about the community, right? And forget about even, the work that I've done thus far. No, you need that accountability. You need that voice at the table, so that, when things come up, I don't have to be the only one to raise my hand. I'm willing to do it. I've had to do it, but it's easier when I know that there are at least two other people that have my back when it comes to doing the board work and the influencing. That has to happen. And so that diversity, the program officers have changed and done a great job, but they're still in the position of having to take the application that's submitted and then translating it and kind of wordsmithing it to fit, whatever theory of change, right? Versus like having people on the board level who understand the needs of community and are willing to trust, right? Take that perceived risk on the work that's happening.
Yeah, I wish we had more savvy in accessing. I think about this a lot. Like, who do I know? What networks do I have to access those boards? And like, my dream is that rather than the program officer being the go-between to the board, that we get to a place where organizations and, pitching people can get right in front of those boards. I often feel now like what I hear is, well, the board only, what have you. And even to you and Hamida talking about giving enough money, we have to keep in mind, they have that 5%, they budget and allocate, particularly with foundations. They're making a decision about how much they're going to give away throughout their portfolio. So it's really like moving, checker pieces, right? It's not,
Right.
It's not like, oh, suddenly if you say you need $12 million, they're going to give you $12 million if that's all they have. That's one thing. And we talk a lot about foundations, but this real estate transformation project that I'm leading is really opening my eyes to family foundations and private wealth. And there is it blows my mind, my mind. And in Washtenaw County in particular, the wealthy people don't come here for you to know, they come here to hide. Right?
Wow. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, because that's what you can do in the county that has the third largest wealth in the state. Is you're surrounded by other people like you. We are a county of 10 percenters.
Wow.
Right. That do a really good job at cloaking and masquerading their wealth, which is a big difference for me. Like when I grew up in Detroit, you knew everybody that had money. I mean, they would rip it. Right. You knew everybody.
Yeah, everybody's going to the same events, the cars and the house, like you can tell.
Right, exactly. So that's been an interesting dynamic. Well, here we are. We always like to leave time for our guests to engage and Hamida, I know we have one more juicy question I want to get into.
Well, Hamida has two, but that's fine. I can hold on to one. I can live with that. I think about the ways in which there is this perception that it's like it's nonprofit versus nonprofit. And so when we're talking to founder, it's like you're either with me or against. It spirals into like this big competition, and so it can at times. And I know that EOD has been moving us to cooperation, or what it means to kind of work hand in hand alongside other nonprofits to say, hey, like we are seeking to impact similar changes. How about we move together? Absolutely, we need each other. And Mike, I thought you had some interesting ideas around what that might look like. So I'd love for you to share with us.
Yeah. So I was sharing with the group that there needs to be more unity in the nonprofit sector, and I took that and ran with it. And there needs to be like a nonprofit union. And I think Yodeep mentioned, Michigan Nonprofit Association kind of started out as that, and I think they probably still would like to be that. But if not, again, I'm always into creating new or finding old structures and reviving them. But there needs to be a union where we can collectively be able to see where that we're not all in competition with each other. Two, be able to have a unified voice to go to the funder community and say, look, we're not going to be pit against each other. We're not going to, kind of like allow mission creep and allow you to kind of mold and shape what our programming is, when that decision should really lie in the hands of the community and the needs that they have, right? And so we just need to have each other's back. And I think, my random, and it's not even a new idea, right, that I can take ownership of, but it's like, there just need to be that unionization. I'm a Detroit kid, my grandparents worked in the automotive industry, right? And so like that's just the mindset that I kind of grew up with. But we just need that shared and collective power, especially in the context of a just transition, where that just piece is really going to lean on us. We need to have an active voice. The collective power and the collective. I mean, even the portion of GDP that is the nonprofit sector, we have that power, but we need to make sure that we're actually using that power and raising our voices on these issues.
I mean, I think you might have even had a different name for the nonprofit sector. That was one thing that also came up.
Oh, I forgot now.
No, you're good. I mean, I think about the ways in which like nonprofit is a misnomer, right? Like it's not that we're seeking to be at zero and not function or not have space to function, right? It's beyond that.
Doug Batoni Stewart, who's over at the Max and Marjorie Fisher Foundation, campaigned, some people might remember this, for a while, to shift our name to the For Impact sector. It's interesting to see these things revive, and I think it's easy for us to like what we've heard today are some practical changes that we can make in our organizations. But to be clear, the structure of the nonprofit sector, how 501c3s are set up, how there's incentivization to move wealth into, like the fact that our sector is a tax write-off for many wealthy people, and it was designed that way. So just like climate, we could all recycle our little stuff, and still, if industry continues to pollute our air and our land and our waters, we're going to see the destruction of the planet, right? So I don't ever want, or part of my learning has been about acknowledging that there are parts of these systems that we're slowly chipping away at, and our decisions mostly impact those people in our spheres of influence. But these small steps lead to big change, right? That's what's so powerful about this idea of working together collectively, of seeing the value of each other in our work. And something that came up that you didn't mention, that has got me I've been thinking about it since you said it, is mergers and collaborations. When that has come up in the past, it's always felt very paternalistic, foundations or industry saying nonprofits should merge. But when I heard it come out of your mouth, I understood that it is my assignment to at least make sure that we are not duplicating efforts and work that either somebody is doing better than us or is best positioned to do, right? Or that we're missing out on an opportunity for mutuality, cooperation, and collaboration that could cause greater impact, both for the staff, and for the communities we serve. So I just appreciate you mentioning that, and this idea of unionizing as a group to use our collective power. That truly is how we share power.
Absolutely, absolutely.
What about folks in the audience? We've got 10-ish minutes before Carly has to do the thing. And I think it's a small enough group if you want to just jump off a mute and be brief, but ask a question. Mark, be happy to answer, I'm sure. Or if you prefer to use chat, you're welcome to do that. And I'm gonna be quiet for 7 seconds because I heard that's how long people need, 7 seconds to decide if they're gonna ask a question.
That's good.
Or maybe you have a comment or a hallelujah, amen, which Etta always puts in the chat for us. Mm. 10 seconds, Michelle. Okay. I just got to work on being quiet, Michelle, even for 2 seconds. Whew. Anything you came to the session sort of longing for that you'd like to probe a little bit more? I saw my girl Karen Andrews was here. Shout out to Karen. Karen helped me with recruiting for years.
Okay, well, I really tried not to be the first person.
Come on.
Here we go. I'm just texting with a couple other people on this call because it's easier. The side chat. I got the chat and the side chat going. And something that's coming up is like, how do we put these demands to funders without everybody putting these demands to funders? Like, you know, if I say, hey, you've got to fund me like I'm going to win, and you can't do shady stuff, so ante up.
Yeah,
obviously in a nicer way, a more palatable way.
yeah,
And so, I mean, I have my own ideas about how I would answer that question, but I'm interested to hear from you all. Like, how do we start? Because I'm about to do, if everything goes according to plan, I'm about to raise a lot of money this year. And I just am ready to do this. So tell me what to say.
You mean not the Jerry Maguire version?
I think you can just attach a clip, like a YouTube clip in your grant request, just of that.
Don't even fill out the grant
just
request. Just send the video. I'm gonna get y'all in trouble. Go ahead, Mark. What you think?
Yeah. So you know, TPF, when we did the when we were part of, before TPF, the original 12 recommendations, like we had nonprofits sign on to it, right? And that foundations may not have listened to it initially, more so because they didn't want to. They read it. Program officers, I would say, that are now in charge now, or that now have moved up, read it 5-6 years ago, and are now coming to us and saying, like, this was impactful. This has shaped the way that I think about grant making, right? And that speaks volumes. It might take time, but I think now is the right time. We're actually thinking about doing something again and just coming out and saying, look, we need to revisit these 12 recommendations. They might not all be relevant to the way philanthropy is now. What does it look like now? And so whether it's TPF or your organization or new being the body, the convener of the nonprofit sector, us going together, I think this kind of goes to that unionization idea, whether it's formal or informal, going together and saying, this is what we're looking for now. I think, you know, there are now more philanthropic publications that are publishing those type of think pieces and things, but like, how do we put some teeth to that, right? And hold philanthropy to the fire in a way that accountability just doesn't happen sometimes. And I hate to say it like this, I don't know a nicer way to say it. Sometimes it just takes, you know, the sector being embarrassed for them to change their practice, right? And like, I'm sure there's a nicer way to say that, but you know, we have to kind of call in for, that's what I'll say. You have to call the sector in, philanthropic sector, into our needs now.
Yeah, I was thinking about ETA for the first time. NU is going to sponsor the Michigan nonprofit, the nonprofit legislation day that is being held. I was trying to find, Hamida, can you help me? Maybe find something on M&A's website. If not, we'll send it out in the follow-up. But part of what I've been thinking about in terms of how do we build collective voice at so we are co-sponsoring with Nonprofit Network out of Jackson, and we are going to put like 10 recommendations for legislators to think about, and one of them is around advocating for more resources to come in. I'm pleased to say M&A did a great job of advocating and got about $32 million that's going to flow into the nonprofit sector out of the CARES Act and ARPA monies. But that compares with hundreds of millions that went, for example, into the small business sector. And so when Mark talks about innovation and talks about like sort of what's our brand, I've been thinking a lot about like what's our brand. And I think some of that we needs to shift for us too. You all, particularly those of you who are working in nonprofits right now, are some of the ways in which you're attending to the needs and with community to respond to their own needs are some of the most innovative things we've ever seen. And yet I think there's this kind of humble, like, what's the word? Like almost overly humble about the ways in which we're doing that. So I'm headed to Lansing in March and want to encourage other people to like come on and show up and come and let's begin to be a little bit more active in shaping at that level. And then I think my experience is that when I had really honest conversations and candid conversations with program officers, for the most part, they were responsive and real. I would say, if you fund me half of this, I cannot do the work. So like, this is what I need. We also, we wrote our fundraising manifesto, and by and large, we are not taking restricted gifts anymore. So I think one of the things you got to ask yourself is, what are you willing to walk away from? That's Mark. Mark said that yesterday. We can't take everybody's grant, right? If it's got all these things tethered to it. So those are just, I know that that's not everybody can do that, but when we can, I think that's a powerful statement as well. Woo. Okay, maybe one more. Thank you, Etta, for being willing to speak up. Anybody else have a comment or anything that hasn't been put in the, Eileen? Oh, I always love when you share, Eileen. Oh yeah, I love this. Another important learning and activating group I've been connecting, resonating, and dreaming with folks. Yeah, at Art Co-op. Yep, towards solidarity, economy, principles, and practices. Yeah, no, good stuff there. Check them out. They're international too, right, Eileen? I was kind of poking around. Hi, Steve.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Go ahead.
It's a global thing, right? Global movement. But yeah, the folks have really, because I'm part of the Great Lakes Echo Center. There's arts and community organizations. So yeah, part of the learning communities that I've been connecting with have to do with how we can move towards solidarity economy. And yeah, lots of stuff going on. And thank you for sharing all the connections that that you have, Mark and Yodit and Hamida.
Happy to, Eileen.
Thank
Steve,
you.
we'll get you in there real quick before we have to wrap up. Hello.
Hey, how are you?
All right, what's your question or comment?
I was going to comment on, what Ed had brought up, just in that I've seen Dewan Dandridge with Black Leaders Detroit do this very well. And you've, the space is very, very relational. And, so you mentioned Doug Stewart as well. And I think building relationships like that, Doug is somebody who advocates and uses his seat of power. So I think that's a key part of it as well, is like finding who are the like-minded people who are already in power. How do you leverage those relationships to be able to do the greatest good? And I think a lot of the other things that you've mentioned as well is like really kind of pushing and having the uncomfortable conversations. I've seen Dewan do that prolifically. It's mind-boggling. Some of the
that brother's so bad. Oh my God.
He's an impressive dude. So
I'm so glad you spoke up, Steve. It's great to have you here. All right. Well, this is the time where I say thank you, Mark. Thank you for saying yes. Thank you. We hope you'll come back and keep us posted on what TPF is doing.
Absolutely. No, thank you for the invitation to the space. Thank y'all for listening. Thank you again for the love and correction. Ever growing, ever learning. And that's what I need. I need a community like this, and looking forward to just being in relationship with you all. After this, I'll definitely send things that we're working on. One of the main things is we're hosting the Given Project, which is a cross-race, cross-class group of individuals that we take you through 3 phases. One is the political education and understanding, social justice landscape, in Detroit and the history. Second is learning how to do fundraising in a social justice perspective. We ask everyone to make a meaningful gift, whatever's meaningful to them, whether that's $5 or $5 million, and to be able to tap into your network to help raise that money. And so you're learning social justice principles, learning fundraising, and then whatever the group raises, you participate in that participatory grant making process and find organizations in Southeast Michigan that are advancing transformation and liberation. And so we'll be launching in April. We're recruiting right now. I see we just thank you, Adi, for dropping that in the chat. I have the application. I'll share with you all, but would love to see some of you help us spread the word. And I think it's really going to be a way, as Adi mentioned, kind of the individual wealth. And you don't have to be wealthy. Like we have people who are impacted by the issues at that table as well. But it's a way for us to come together and have real conversations about race and class, and to then take that theory and activate on it. So.
Wealth has broad definitions.
Exactly.
Thank
you again for the invitation.
Thank you for being with us, Mark. I also just want to name, we're all learning together. And today we chatted with something that we heard from you. Tomorrow, you, Yodit, someone else might be chatting with something they hear from me. So we're learning together, right? I am so excited to hear more about how TPF grows and develops. I'm also how do I cordon off within learning communities like union dues? Because I am interested in this. For folks. Heck yeah. So for folks who have attended CJ before, Centering Justice before, we affectionately call it CJ. Oh, Yodit already dropped the link in the chat.
It's not me, it's Carly, but for some reason it shows like it's me.
Oh, okay. Well, Yodit gets the credit. Well, Carly gets the credit too. As some of you know, that we really check these surveys out. We make changes, and this is our chance to co-create with you. So play with us.
Yeah, grab that link. It'll take you just a few minutes to fill it out, give us your feedback on today's session, and help us think about shaping future sessions.
And speaking of future sessions, our next session is going to be on February 15th. It's going to be iterative. It's going to be looking at whatever you share with us today and being like, okay, what do we do with this? So please let us know how you experienced this, what you wanted more of, what we maybe could have had a smaller dose of, anything else. And
prayer. I'm trying to get Amanda Alexander from Detroit Justice Center to come be with us. They just launched she stepped down and they are going to a co-director model. We want to hear all about her decision to step away and what they're doing. So pray with me that she shows up, and we'll go deeper into how we share leadership.
Thank you again, Mark.